So, how often did you open the documentation to the library and realize that you would not find anything there? How often have you been frustrated because you read a great description of a function but just don't understand how to use it in your project? It's not about you, it's about the documentation. And today, I will tell what we can do about it. A few words about me. My name is Ilya Kaznacheev, and I'm remote backend software engineer. I'm the founder of Golang Voronezh and a host of Z Namespace podcast. Also, I organize local conferences and meetups, and I really like coffee. Golang Voronezh is a tiny community in the city where I live, in Russia. We are about 30 active members, and we are regularly organizing all sorts of interesting events. Since everything is online, at least for now, you're welcome to take part. So just ping me if you want to participate. And by the way, that's not a pirate. That's Peter the Great, the founder of my city. So today we're gonna talk about the Godoc. It's a great tool for built-in documentation as well as a website for hosting public project documentation. However, I rarely see it being used to its full potential. In many projects, Godoc isn't used at all, which makes me very sad. But stop talking about sad things. Let's better talk about what the coding project documentation is. So, what are popular ways to maintain documentation we have? There used to be popular approaches like corporate wiki portal, Confluence, Microsoft Doc stored on a corporate disk, or sometimes even Markdown. Well, there are all handy tools in general, but there's one problem. This documentation is constantly getting out of date. In addition, when multiple people work in parallel on a code, it's very difficult to update different parts of the documentation in a way that avoid conflicts. This led to a new approach, documentation as a code. There are many solutions for different languages, such as JavaDoc, JSDoc, Python docstring, ABAPDoc, and, of course, the Godoc. So, what the Godoc is? Godoc parses Go source code, including comments, and produces documentation in HTML or just as plain text. The end result is documentation tightly coupled with the code it documents. It has its own formatting style. I don't really know why they didn't want to just use Markdown, but in reality, you will have to play with indents and line breaks to split text into blocks and format them. Here is a function documentation with a code sample. Many IDEs support Godoc, so you can view the documentation right in the editor. This is what the same text looks like in the VS Code. And this is how it looks in Golang. And this is what it looks like on a Godoc website. It recently moved to pkg.go.dev. But there is still a question. Is Godoc a perfect documentation tool? Let's review some examples. You've probably seen similar picture a lot. Bare list of functions without any description, just index and list of functions, types, constants, and so on. Or even better, with comments that just duplicate function names. We can't say it's bad, it's just a lack of documentation itself. And this is an example when the library has very detailed documentation of functions, but it is absolutely impossible to understand how to use the library and where to start. Here you can find a description of the library's capabilities, but no information about how to use it. As I said, functions are well described, but to understand which function to use after which one, you should either find examples of using the library or explore the source code. Probably it's okay for someone to just read the code, and many people tell that in Go, better way to understand the Go is to read the sources. But I think that for many use cases, you just don't want to know what inside of the black box of the library. You want to start using it, you want to start implementing it and know where to start. And in this case, there is no way to do that. But some libraries have everything you need. A detailed description of the main ideas and purposes of the project, as well as basic information and tips on how to use their functionality. Here you can see also detailed description of the function with examples of its use. You don't need to look for examples in the internet. You can just see how the author designed to use these features in real life, in real use cases. And with these examples, we saw that even detailed documentation can be useless, and that even small changes can make it very useful. So what can we do to make our documentation as good and useful? First, you don't need a book, you need a guide. In modern programming, most of the time we don't need to know exactly how the library works, at least not until we are engaged in optimization. So it's okay to just understand the semantics, the public interface, let's say, of the library to know how to use it and to use it. However, many even large projects, such as Kubernetes, describe their documentation as a detailed reference. Most often, we don't need a detailed description of each function, but an understanding of the general concept of the library, what it's capable of, and whether it does what we expect. Start with abstract ideas, what the project is designed for, which problems it solves, how it's better than other solutions. It's also helpful to give examples of how to start using the library right at the beginning. Let's say for an HTTP server, this may be an example of how to start a server with default settings and a simple handler. As you go through the documentation, go deeper into what a particular function does and how it can be used. Many libraries contain a very detailed explanation of each function, but it's absolutely unclear where to start and how to build a workable application. Mm, clearly describe how to start using your library at the beginning of the documentation. This will help users to take the first steps and make it easier to become familiar with the project itself. Instead of abstract theory, give an example of a real library usage patterns. Let's say if you're building a library to validate SQL queries, show where it would be useful. For example, to prevent SQL injections. And add examples, more and more examples. This is an excellent case of how to describe the usage of a function in the documentation. Nothing describes the code better than just the code itself. But we need more than just code to quickly figure out how to use the library. Do you know that you can add real code samples to your documentation? To do this, you should create the test function named like example function name underscore description for function examples, or example underscore description for package level examples. So this example in the documentation describes how we can use it, and in the output you will see the output results. And when you will run test, it will compare the real results with this output form. So this example in the documentation will look like that. Examples are a great way to show real life cases or real examples and best practices in using libraries. The examples represent the most detailed level of documentation. Using them, you directly show the engineers who will use or work on your library how to use its functionality and what features it offers. And also, they work as unit tests, so it will increase your library test coverage. And that's pretty all for today. It's a link on this topic and a blog post about Godoc, so you may read more about it. And thank you for your attention, and let's discuss.
So there was a question in the chat. Did you say that, Ilya?
Yeah. How would you contrast the high-level abstract overview to what it typically put into the README in the root of a project? The README is typically written in Markdown, which also allows for more flexible formatting and the inclusion of screencasts, animated GIF demos, for example. Yes, but when I'm working in my IDE, for example, I don't really want to switch to browser or something like that, because I can just hover the mouse on the package name or function name and instantly see the documentation. So my idea that it would be better to keep everything in one place, and some projects do that. Of course, if you're building a public project, a public library, and it has a GitHub page or something like that, that's useful to have a well-described readme.md or even a wiki page. But when you will use it in your IDE, it will be better to see detailed description there in Godoc. So that's the answer. And I know that the new Godoc website called pkg.go.dev probably supports README pages. Somehow I don't really know how to enable README in the documentation because my packages work without this page on Godoc website, but some projects does. So that also the possibility. But I think that it would be perfectly if one day Godoc could work with Markdown, but for now we have to do it the Go way. The next question is, you could use tool to generate Markdown from Godoc. Yes, but I haven't tried that, but I think that it will pretty ugly because you don't have lists or tables or something like that in Godoc, and
So,
it will, yeah.
so that was just an observation of the previous question, but I really think that there's a pattern described in the Software Engineering at Google Lessons Learned book, which I think is quite interesting. It's the G3 Doc tool, where they've moved documentation into Markdown along with the code base. And I think that style of documentation, not just for the library consumers, but if you're building a service, the service consumers generated from your code base, some combination of Godoc and Markdown in the same code base, is probably something that the industry needs to go forward towards, but I don't think it exists yet. It's wishful thinking more than anything else.
I also think that that could be a really great feature because the approach itself, documentation as a code, is very great, but there are still many gaps between between real project documentation and features of Godoc, for example, or maybe if you have a couple of services and one written in Go, another written in, I don't know, Java, for example, and you want to extract all of the documentation in the same place, you can just do that for now. And that probably would be great because yeah, we don't want to, as a programmer, I don't want to store my technical documentation in Confluence or something like that, because it's always painful to update that to keep it up to date. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to second that. Confluence is probably the perfectly wrong choice because of that simple impedance mismatch. Because you're always going to push back and say, oh, I'll do that next week, I'll do that next week. And anyone who says they don't say that is lying.
I
Yeah,
think the big thing that's missing for me for like the Markdown approach is being able to embed like rich graphs and graphics and sequence diagrams and like ERDs. And if Markdown
So,
had a good way to escape and then render that in GitHub,
so
or
I've actually been using Mermaid.js inside Markdown, inside a Hugo blog as a page generation tool. And I think that that sort of generating a static website process could actually work really well with Godoc and JavaDoc and everything else that we build. So have a pipeline that takes our Godoc, generates it into Markdown, embeds it inside a Hugo document or a Gatsby document that then generates an actual static website that has proper HTML in it and not Confluence.
yeah, I love it. I do the same thing for GQRGen. And I use a service called Render that does it in like 3 clicks, where you can take a GitHub repo and then on publish to master, generate out a static site that's automatically been deployed with CloudFront in front of it.
Yeah.
It's like super easy operationally to do, and I wish more projects did it.
And it pulls it into your normal code development process, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've actually had a little bit of an issue there because you kind of want versions and you still want tags, and you want your documentation to be a little bit ahead. It's kind of the opposite of the problem that Ilya described, where your kind of documentation is behind. It's like you find some edge case in the documentation and you want to publish fixes to your documentation, and they're not kind of tagged in Git. Like, it's not a new version of the code. You're just describing something that probably should have been done along with the code. But you don't want to tag it because it's been co-located in your source repo.
Yeah, that's also a good side effect constraint that we'd have to address. I noticed Berger has a question for you, Ilya, and it's saying that with Godoc, the code samples or the code examples in your documentation are compiled and executed when the documentation is generated. So the code's guaranteed to work and the output is guaranteed to be correct. Is that, what would you say on that?
Code samples, that's a good question, because I know that when you run tests, all of your examples will run as unit tests because they are unit tests. And also on the, I'm not sure, but I think that on the previous version of the Godoc side that was like godoc.org or something like that, there was a possibility to directly open the example code in a playground. I'm not sure, but I remember such a feature there that misses in the new version. So probably when you run your Godoc, it will not run the example code because there is an output written in these examples. So yeah, but if you have continuous integration in your project and you're running unit tests there, that will ensure that your examples work as well.
So, Ilya, do you use this internally or external? When you're using Godoc, is it for things that are used internally, or is it a public API or something that you use it for?
You mean in my projects or?
Yeah. Where have you used Godoc? Have you used it just for internal inter-team communication or external?
Both. So I have some public projects in GitHub, and there I hope that I have nice documentation there, and that also contains examples. Like, you may let me a sec. I'll try to find this library. If my laptop will allow me to open the browser. For example, there's a library called cleanenv. I will put the link there. Hopefully everyone can see that. And there is a Godoc there, and you can find there a lot of examples. That's not a perfect illustration for the talk, because here is the beginning steps or entry steps missing, and I want to fix that. But you can find some examples, and you can find how examples are bound to functions and package and so on. And when I work on my private projects, like when I build stuff in my company, I use Godoc to document stuff inside the project, and anyone in my team can read the documentation in the IDE. So if I build, let's say, some internal library for logging, and for now we have 3 or 4 login wrappers, and everyone can just open the IDE, import the code, and then just read the documentation there. You don't need to even open the GitLab. You don't need to connect to the VPN and so on. That's pretty useful, and it speeds up your daily routine like that. So it's still impossible to run Godoc server locally. You can run Godoc server locally by means of Godoc tool. Godoc, let me, it should be something like Godoc -http equal and the port, or something like that, and it will serve the documentation on this port, but only the packages inside of the Go pass will be available there. So if you're working with modules, it still doesn't work with modules. I hope it will work with modules soon, but for now it's so. But there is also another common tool that called Go space doc. It's a doc tool inside Go or something like that. And this tool prompts you just a documentation from your code. And as far as I know, that this is how IDEs work with Godoc, like through Go Please or directly like Goland. So yeah. And briefly speaking, I use Godoc either for public packages in a Godoc website or in my private development in any IDE that support Go. I'm not sure about Vim, but I'm using Goland and VS Code, and that works in both of these very well. So, another questions?
I guess someone was asking about like multiple monitors or something, but because you're saying you want the documentation in the same IDE, is that because, is there any particular reason why you want it in your IDE, or just easy copy paste of examples or something?
I'm not sure that I clearly understand the question, but
it was just asking if
okay.
you use multiple monitors.
Yeah. I use for now. I use laptop for messaging and so on. So on laptop, it's laptop display, it's mail, messengers, calendar, another mail, and so on. And also I use widescreen monitor where I do everything else. Also, I use different screens for different kind of tasks. So I have one screen for my, I don't know, private stuff, like browser, like anything else. I have another screen for work, where I have another browser profile with all of my working bookmarks and IDs and so on. So that's pretty useful. And I would say that widescreen is much better than just two monitors, at least for me. And it's easier to connect when your laptop has only two USB interfaces. So yeah, Confluence is the place documentation goes to dead. Yes and no. So I think Confluence is the great tool for business documentation, because normally it's where your, I don't know, your business analytic or business partner or any person can write the documentation in business language. And then when you turn this into the code, you'll write the technical documentation, and this documentation should be bound with the code. And also I like the approach of a single source of truth. So if you work with any definition, any specification of anything, it should be the one place where it should be described, and other places should depend on this. For example, Godoc depend on Golang sources. So if you will change source, the documentation will change as well. The same with API specifications like Swagger or protobuf. So when you will change your protobuf specification, you will regenerate the code and it will automatically be synchronized with the specification. The same with Swagger. So we use GoSwagger to generate server-side code based on Swagger specification, and the specification itself is the single source of truth. The same can go also for database. So I know that there are tools to generate models in Go based on database schema. I haven't tried that yet, but I definitely will try to use that in my next project, because it also looks interesting and it probably will save some time for you. And yeah, the same goes for anything. For example, I've moved to PlantUML about, I don't know, a couple of months ago. PlantUML is the language to describe any diagrams like UML, like sequence diagrams and so on in text, like text, okay. And that's cool because you can just put it in your markdown file, and then you can open it in VS Code plugin, for example, and so on. And you can use Git or something like that to track changes. And that's cool because with normal diagrams in SVG, it's not so easy to track the changes like diffs and so on in Git. And yeah, that's also cool. So for Confluence, I could say it has its own audience, but for technical documentation, it isn't a great solution. Yeah, hyperfocus on your. I use Nord plugin, Nord theme. This is the color settings that you can use for many different things like terminal, IDs, web browser, and there is this set of same colors. Really nice to look at. I will show you. Oh, I've opened my ID and 3 screens appeared. Let me sec. So for example, this is, let me sec. Am I still sharing my screen?
The presentation's still visible, yes.
Yes, so now you probably should be able to see my VS Code, and you can see that it's something like blue and gray, and that's really cool when you stare in your monitor about 8 to 10 hours in a day. And it's available for VS Code, for Vim, for IDEA, for iTerm, and for Chrome, and other, like also for Eclipse. So you can use this anywhere, and it's just, I don't know, it's nice.